Imagine this. You're standing in a massive crowd. The air is just electric. Maybe there are flags waving. You hear a speaker's voice just booming, and it's hitting every single one of those resonant frequencies in your chest. You look over at the person next to you, and they're genuinely moved. Maybe there are tears, maybe just this fierce pride, but there's definitely a fire in their eyes.
Yeah.
And they're talking about commitment, about patriotism, this necessity of loving the nation. And in that moment, that huge surge of emotion, it feels like the absolute peak of moral clarity. It feels huge.
That powerful image, that sense of overwhelming immediate energy, that is exactly where our source material begins its rather uncomfortable examination.
Right.
It highlights a really critical paradox in human behavior, which is that all of that energy, all that soaring, almost spiritual emotion, it has virtually zero kinetic staying power.
It just vanishes.
It vanishes. The sources observe that the feeling flows away just as quickly as it arrived.
Yeah.
The crowd disperses, and what follows?
Usually.
Often, nothing. No measurable practical action. Just this sort of lingering, beautiful residue of a momentary sensation.
And that sensation, that high, is what our sources argue is so dangerously and persistently mistaken for true, deep commitment to our nation. So that's the core question we're unpacking today, isn't it? Why do we, as human beings, so instinctively confuse a fleeting emotional surge, which gives us that instant gratification of feeling heroic, with the deep, lasting commitment that requires actual, unglamorous, difficult work?
Our mission in this deep dive is really to act as guides through this psychological terrain. We're looking at source material that dissects this confusion in terms of human integrity, social conditioning, and even our existential need.
And this isn't about judging patriotism itself.
Not at all. It's about understanding the mechanics of why we have this pervasive preference for immediate sensation over long-term responsibility.
And to anchor this whole conversation, the text gives us this absolutely perfect central metaphor. It's the contrast between paper fire, or Lu Ju, and coal fire, or Lu Than.
It's such a visceral distinction, isn't it? The paper fire. Think about it. It's cheap, it's fast, it's so easy to ignite.
It just goes up in a flash.
In a flash. It burns incredibly bright, draws all the attention to itself. It spreads rapidly through a crowd. It's dazzling. But the instant that paper is consumed, the fire is dead. It leaves no lasting warmth, no substance, no enduring impact whatsoever. And that right there is the nature of the feeling. High excitement, zero staying power.
It's all form over function. Whereas the coal fire, that's a different beast entirely.
Completely different. It's hard to start. It requires patience, consistent effort just to get it going. It smolders slowly. It puts out smoke. It's often dull, less dramatic.
Totally unseen by the cheering crowds.
Exactly. But, and this is the crucial part, it provides enduring warmth all night long. It is sustained commitment. It's endurance. That is the nature of true love and action for the nation. It builds, it lasts, and it doesn't need any applause.
Right. So we're going to see how this metaphor plays out in, well, basically every aspect of our civic lives. The paper fire makes us feel noble right now.
While the coal fire requires us to be noble over a long period of time.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our journey today is to really understand the deep why behind this profound preference for the dazzling, easy, fleeting sensation over the quiet, enduring responsibility of the coal fire. We're dissecting why we so consistently choose the emotional excitement that satisfies the ego over the patient work that actually builds something durable.
To start, we have to make the distinction absolute. The feeling of patriotism is purely an emotional state. It's a state of immediate excitement, kind of summoing.
A rush.
It's a rush, activated swiftly by rhetorical cues, stirring music, powerful symbols. It offers the individual this quick, almost intoxicating sense of belonging to something vast and noble.
And critically, it demands nothing in return.
Nothing. No specific action, no concrete effort, no measurable sacrifice. It is strong, yes, but it is an inherently shallow affection.
But hang on, doesn't every great movement start with some kind of feeling? Isn't that initial excitement necessary to motivate the effort in the first place? If I feel this immense pride, isn't that at least the spark for the coal fire?
That's the essential question, and the source material answers it pretty firmly. While emotion can be an initial stimulus, the problem arises when the emotion is substituted for the action. The paper fire is so satisfying in its own right. It pervades such an immediate moral and emotional high that the vast majority of people just stop there. They confuse the spark with the sustained combustion.
They prefer the sensation.
They prefer this immediate, high-intensity sensation. precisely because it removes the burden of genuine responsibility.
So they choose the feeling because it provides instant gratification. The feeling of being right, of belonging, of being a good person right now.
Right now.
Without having to do the inconvenient work of being good later. It's like the moral equivalent of fast food.
That's a perfect analogy. And when we look at true love for the nation, the coal fire, we realize its defining characteristic is that it is utterly quiet, long-term, and sustained. It is commitment in the complete absence of external validation.
Can you give us some examples of what the coal fire looks like in daily life so we can really see the difference between that and, a slogan on a bumper sticker?
Sure. The coal fire is mundane, but it's foundational. It's the scientist quietly working on long-term agricultural resilience, knowing they won't see the results for a decade. It's the citizen who faithfully pays their taxes, not because they feel some rush of patriotism, but because it is their quiet civic duty. It's exercising self-discipline, protecting the local environment in ways that no one will ever see.
Or just living a decent life without burdening society with corruption or carelessness.
Exactly. These acts are enduring, they're sustainable, but they never, ever make the evening news.
And this highlights the deep paradox, doesn't it? Feeling is easy. A few passionate shouts, a quick social media post. Action is hard, silent sacrifice, consistency, doing the right thing when nobody's watching.
The paper fire makes you feel noble. It gives you an immediate sense of moral achievement. But the coal fire, it demands action. And action forces that really uncomfortable ego-checking question. What have I actually accomplished, and what did it cost me personally?
And that self-interrogation is what people are trying to avoid.
Desperately. The emotional surge is a magnificent form of self-deception. It allows us to feel morally complete without undertaking any of the required moral labor. It just gives the ego a free pass.
And the sources are really harsh about how quickly this all fades. That emotional person we saw at the beginning, 10 minutes after the rally, they're complaining about traffic, they're snapping at a service worker, the crowd breaks up, and no sustained practical action follows. So why is confusing this momentary excitement with real patriotism so dangerous? Not just for the country, but for what the source calls human integrity on tip.
Because it's corrosive to the soul. When we habitually substitute high emotion for sustained action, we normalize a life that's built on illusion. We literally train ourselves that feeling good is a replacement for being good.
It warps our internal compass.
It completely warps it. And if we allow that paper fire to define our personal identity, and then by extension our national identity, the result is chronic instability and inevitably a profound burnout. So, to be clear, we are not judging the emotion itself. We are dissecting the psychological misdirection that leads us to choose the flashiest but least durable path.
Okay, so let's get into the social psychological roots of this. Why do we prefer the paper fire?
Well, what's fascinating here is that this preference isn't really a moral failing. It's more of a consequence of our fundamental human design. We have to look at our neural wiring to understand why the feeling is so much easier to choose than the action.
Tell us about that wiring. Why is the human brain hardwired for that immediate emotional rush?
Evolutionary psychology suggests our brains are optimized for short-term survival and immediate reaction, not for planning multi-decade civic projects.
Right, fight or flight.
Exactly. It prefers concepts that are fast, stimulating, easily infectious, and that instantly create a sense of tribal belonging. The feeling of patriotism, activated by these simple cues, is the perfect product for this wiring. It's high-minded, it's infectious, and it provides an instant collective emotional payoff.
So it's a shortcut our brains just naturally want to embrace, regardless of the long-term cost.
Precisely. And it demands virtually zero personal cost. Now contrast this with the coal fire actions. Self-discipline, honest work, quiet community service.
Slow, difficult things.
They're slow, they're difficult, and they don't activate the strong reward centers of the brain in the same way. They don't generate applause. And because they're unexciting, the brain tends to dismiss them in favor of the emotional high, which delivers that immediate hit of dopamine and self-affirmation.
This perfectly captures what the source calls this ancient psychological law, that humans prefer sensation over reality. We prefer the illusion of nobility over the actual work of nobility.
It is always, always easier to wear the appearance of greatness than to silently labor to construct it. And modern life, especially through digital platforms, has become a massive amplification system for this very trend. If a quick status update or a passionate social media argument can convey the powerful appearance of national spirit, then the feeling becomes overwhelmingly prevalent. The sources note this critical inverse relationship. The easier the appearance of patriotism becomes, the hollower the actual commitment gets.
So we get the feeling of having the moral high ground without ever having to get our hands dirty with the real work. And this is amplified by the power of the collective, right? The structure of the crowd, the amma.
Yes, crowds are essential emotional amplifiers. They grant individuals this powerful sense of meaningful participation, even when their actual contribution is just being there emotionally.
Right.
Gustave Le Bon, in his classic work on crowd psychology, he noted that once individuals merge into a crowd, they are sort of absolved of the need for internal reflection or self-inquiry. The questions just vanish.
Questions like, am I being rational here? Or do I truly understand the complexity of this issue?
Exactly. The collective emotion just washes all of that away. It's a kind of escape mechanism.
It absolutely is. The collective feeling replaces personal responsibility. Standing alone, an individual has to face those painful, small questions about their own daily discipline, their financial integrity, whether they keep their promises, their respect for their neighbors. These are mirrors that reflect our personal shortcomings.
And in the crowd, those mirrors are shattered. The collective emotion acts as this powerful veil, and it seamlessly conceals all our personal flaws.
And the ego loves this shortcut. The ego wants to feel magnificent without the suffering of genuine personal growth.
The ego wants to feel good. And being truly good requires effort, confronting our inadequacies, and taking on painful responsibility. The paper fire offers an immediate, intoxicating, high-speed path to self-designation as a good person without requiring any difficult personal change.
The source highlights something profound here, that people use national emotion as a substitute for building personal character, hun kashka hun.
They're essentially hiding. They borrow the country's image to mask their own immaturity, their own sepu tuntan. It's so much easier to proclaim yourself a selfless lover of some grand symbol than to face the quiet, uncomfortable mediocrity of your own underdeveloped self.
So they're looking to seem great by association rather than by genuine internal construction.
And that connects directly to our primal human need for belonging.
Which leads to this false belief that just merging into the collective emotion fulfills their required commitment.
Right. They desperately seek community for support on these grand topics like nationhood, but they confuse the collective emotional response with actual collective building. They forget that only individual action consistently applied over time builds a country. Collective motion just generates heat and noise.
It's like the coal fire needs individual shovels, not just a collective choir.
That's a great way of putting it.
And how does this connect to understanding? It seems like many people who feel this intense patriotism are only loving an imaginary version of the country.
They're loving the myth, the idealized version, the beautiful, simplified narrative, not the complex reality, the thukti vu tut kansel fuktamto. Mature love requires understanding and acceptance of both strengths and weaknesses. The feeling just clings to simple symbols and comforting, easy stories. True love involves deep, often difficult understanding. The feeling requires none of it. For example, loving an idealized past is easy. Loving the current flawed political struggle and demanding honesty from it, that's the coal fire.
And to wrap up this section, we have to acknowledge the structure of modern media as the accelerant for all of this.
Social media is perfectly optimized to spread the paper fire. It amplifies emotions related to identity at supersonic speeds. People feel like they've done their civic duty just by sharing a meme or expressing outrage online.
The mechanism reinforces the idea that emotion is the end product.
The medium itself makes emotion inflate while action shrinks. The real patriotism, things like kindness, integrity, persistence, is small, it's silent, it's unshareable, and so it's ignored by the system.
Which creates this potent vulnerability to manipulation.
Precisely. Because the feeling is so potent and so easily triggered by simple cues, it becomes the ultimate tool for exploitation. If a society relies mainly on feeling, lacking the grounding of true responsibility, collective excitement becomes an uncontrolled, shallow fire that can be steered very easily.
And the danger is that the person consumed by this feeling believes they're acting from a place of righteousness.
Yes, which makes their shallow fire resistant to rational thought or any external correction.
That distinction between the moral high ground and the emotional trap is so necessary. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. We're moving from why we prefer the feeling to how society and our own minds sustain this dangerous illusion. How does it become so enduring and difficult to break free from?
We're talking about the unconscious defensive mechanisms now.
Yes.
These are the silent psychological gears that keep the paper fire burning in our minds, even when the actual event is long over. They are, essentially, survival mechanisms for the ego.
So let's start with the first one, confusing the symbolic with the real.
Mechanism 1 is the substitution of action with symbol. People confuse the emotional activation they get from symbols, the flag, the anthem, a dramatic story, with reality itself.
So they think, because I feel this strong pride when I see the flag, I must be a good patriot?
Exactly. The emotion is the proof of their love. We saw this in the critique of the paper fire. True patriotism lives in these unseen, small acts adhering to contracts, respecting community standards. But symbols inflate emotion so effectively that real small action starts to look meaningless by comparison.
And that just perpetuates the illusion that only grand emotional gestures count.
Right.
So this emotional rush provides a kind of pleasure that is almost addicting. Which brings us to mechanism 2, the pleasure of collective morality.
It is deeply addicting. Blending into a national emotion yields this intense moral pleasure, the feeling of being on the absolutely right side of the human equation. The source describes this as an intoxicating, fast high.
But if they feel morally complete based on emotion alone, doesn't that just kill the motivation to do actual moral work?
It absolutely does. The moral pleasure creates a fatal illusion. If the required depth of responsibility can be traded for the cheap excitement of collective emotion, why would anyone choose the hard, quiet work? The motivation for true good deeds, which often involves sacrifice and confrontation, it just evaporates when that easy, emotionally validated path is available.
And mechanism 3 highlights how the crowd literally halts personal growth by stopping individual reflection.
Right. The crowd liberates the individual from the most painful question of all. What have I done lately, and am I falling short?
Safety in numbers prevents self-examination.
The source is very clear on this. Crowds amplify the strength of emotion, but they significantly diminish rational capacity. A community based purely on collective feeling sacrifices long-term sustainability for short-term intensity. They become easily led, prone to rash actions simply because they feel powerful as a unit.
And the ego, desperate to maintain that good person identity, employs mechanism 4, rationalization.
Yes, people rationalize their lack of action by convincing themselves that their feeling, their pride, or their passionate participation is proof of their love. This is a critical psychological defense mechanism.
It's designed to shield the ego from a painful truth.
The painful truth of their own apathy or laziness or failure to contribute. They have to redefine contribution from meaning hard work to meaning strong feeling, just to avoid acknowledging their own shortcomings.
Mechanism 5 is deeply unsettling. The ego's projection and magnification. This is about borrowing light when you have no internal illumination of your own.
This really touches the core of personal insecurity. Individuals who lack internal achievement or self-confidence, they must rely on grand national symbols to borrow light. They'll talk incessantly about national love as a means to prove their own personal greatness without having to build that greatness internally.
So they use the nation as a cloak, atamachang, to hide this internal emptiness, this sut, trong, ben, trong.
Yes, and as we noted earlier, this borrowing leads directly to extremism. They become aggressive when that symbol is threatened.
Because they're not defending the nation.
They're defending the image of I am the patriot. Any perceived slight to the national symbol is experienced as a profound personal existential threat. They cling to the emotion in the symbol because if either of those fades, that internal emptiness is instantly revealed. This makes them highly reactive and often disproportionately aggressive in their defense.
And mechanism 6 is the immediate conversion of that patriotic feeling into righteous indignation, or finesse.
The feeling is incredibly volatile. It instantly converts to anger or indignation when it's challenged. And indignation is powerfully contagious. When it's justified under the banner of patriotism, people genuinely believe their strong emotion is righteousness, Qinghane. They don't have to think, they just have to feel angry on behalf of the symbol.
And this hollow anger, it just burns out reason.
It does. It prioritizes immediate emotional release, attacking those who dissent, judging others over any measured constructive response. It's a fire that produces only ash, consuming both the one who expresses it and those around them, all under the guise of doing the right thing.
Mechanism 7 is the belief that the emotion is the contribution.
This is the ultimate self-deception. They truly believe their intense feelings have intrinsic value and that they count as contributing to the nation.
But the country only changes through persistent daily actions.
Right, obeying traffic laws, being honest in small transactions, developing skills. Emotion builds nothing physical or lasting. This false sense of accomplishment strips away the motivation for the necessary, difficult work.
And finally, mechanism 8, which really summarizes the risk here, their vulnerability to manipulation.
When you operate purely on feeling, you are essentially a puppet. Those who rely solely on emotion are easily manipulated by carefully crafted symbols or words that are designed to hit their emotional core. Lacking any rational foundation, instinct, and emotion make their decisions for them.
The potency of national pride or fear makes them easy targets.
The easiest targets, leading the crowd to unconscious and often regretted actions, they are incapable of discerning truth because emotion has become their only filter.
So if we connect all of these mechanisms, the problem really transcends mere behavior. It drills down to the core human need for identity, for purpose, for meaning. This is where the existential layer comes in.
Yes, and we have to face the gap, the distance between the intensity of the emotion and the actual life of the person holding it.
That gap is the breeding ground for illusion and profound fear.
Absolutely. People throw themselves into the feeling of patriotism as an immediate remedy for an existential void that they are too afraid to confront directly. It is a psychological distraction from the deep-seated anxiety that their individual lives might be inconsequential.
So we're talking about borrowing value to cope with feeling inadequate.
Exactly. When your personal value is shaky or uncertain, you will instinctively borrow that value from the collective. We fear being mundane, meaningless, or inadequate in the face of life's demands.
And the national symbol.
The national symbol, the glorious homeland, the heroic history, it provides instant high-level meaning and belonging. But they don't love the nation. They love the feeling of having a profound place within something grand.
The nation becomes a mirror, a kaigyung, reflecting the idealized self they wish they were.
Yes, they project their desired identity onto the symbol and then feel that identity reflected back at them. This merging of the ego with the symbol makes the feeling of patriotism a powerful, short-lived spiritual drug. It's intoxicating because it instantly resolves that crisis of identity.
But the high fades, leaving them more empty than before. They become addicted to the feeling.
They become dependent on that emotional dosage just to maintain their sense of worth. When the euphoria wears off, they're left confused and they have to seek another dose, creating this chronic state of emotional and civic instability. They're constantly chasing the next paper fire event just to feel whole again.
This speaks to the fear of the mundane, doesn't it? The idea that daily life is boring and the coal fire is just too ordinary.
Daily life for most people is routine work, small financial anxieties, unfinished ambitions. It often lacks the feeling of living for something truly epic. The feeling of patriotism addresses this deepest anxiety, the fear that their life lacks meaning, by instantaneously lifting them above the ordinary.
It transforms the mundane citizen into a heroic defender of a grand ideal.
Even if that heroism is only internal and momentary, and the quiet demand of true love is that it's too normal.
Kwabintuan.
Exactly. True love for the nation is too ordinary to satisfy the ego. It requires honesty in a small job, keeping promises to a family, respecting a neighbor's property. This quiet, routine goodness cannot compete with the dazzling, dramatic high of the paper fire. Choosing the dazzle allows them to forget the discomfort of their own smallness and inadequacy.
The existential choice is between superficiality and depth.
And they choose light over substance, avoiding the painful necessity of self-improvement. The paper fire offers instant belonging, bypassing the years of effort needed to build true belonging through contribution, responsibility, and deep understanding. Instant satisfaction creates craving. True love is a quiet, enduring promise.
And we return to the hardest truth. The relationship is fundamentally with the self, not the nation.
If a person only loves the feeling, they are loving their own image projected onto the national symbol. They're utilizing the country to glorify their ego. The love flows back to the self. This self-serving relationship guarantees fragility because the source of their worth is external, dependent on the symbol's continued vibrancy.
And ultimately, true love is feared because it demands personal growth.
It demands that we grow up Len. True love is painful because it requires accountability, perseverance, and facing complexity. The paper fire demands nothing but the easy activation of emotion.
And this reliance on emotion without action leads to a disastrous widening of the gap between who they think they are and who they truly are.
And that psychological instability increases the need for stronger emotional highs, making them easily agitated, intensely judgmental, and prone to seeing any differing opinion as a threat to their constructed, fragile reality. They're not fighting for their country, they're fighting for their identity.
It's clear this is not just a civic problem, it's a personal, emotional, and psychological crisis. So what does this constant reliance on the paper fire actually cost the individual? What happens to their inner life when emotion becomes the only metric of self-worth?
The individual's internal stability just collapses. The strong but hollow emotion provides a sense of intense motion, but there's no actual psychological progress. They don't become more mature, they don't become more responsible, they simply become emotionally dependent on external validation to maintain a facade of goodness.
Which results in identity distortion.
Absolutely. Identity has to be built on action, habit, and overcoming challenges. When they build their identity on transient emotion, they believe they are good simply because they feel good. Their identity becomes a house of cards, an illusion that's easily shattered by any small event that contradicts that feeling, like a political setback or a social challenge. Their self-esteem is entirely conditional.
And they become emotional addicts, needing constant new stimuli.
Exactly. They're perpetually chasing the next story, the next crisis, the next powerful symbol to feel meaningful again. Lacking a foundation of quiet, sustained action, they constantly seek stronger external stimuli, creating a feedback loop that actively prevents internal death. Their life becomes a relentless, exhausting search for sensation rather than a patient pursuit of truth.
And they deceive themselves by measuring their value using misguided metrics.
Right. They judge themselves as morally superior because they were moved by a story, or responsible because they were indignant about a headline. They mistake volume for virtue, and when they are alone, that facade cracks, forcing them to perpetually seek external validation. The next crowd, the next heated debate, to reignite that emotional high. Their internal life remains poor because it's completely dependent on external triggers.
And this dependence on instant gratification breeds a profound lack of patience and maturity.
The paper fire habit trains them to avoid long-term processes. They cannot endure quiet, unpraised deeds. And since nation building, like all great endeavors, is founded on small, patient, cumulative acts, this lack of endurance means they will quit before achieving anything sustainable. They become the citizens who are enthusiastic starters, but chronic non-finishers.
And they use judgment of others as a shield to protect their fragile emotional self-image.
Yes, those who rely on feeling are the first to judge those who don't express similar emotions, labeling the silent as unpatriotic. They fail to recognize that true love is quiet, and that this aggressive judgment is a protective mechanism, a way to avoid looking at their own lack of sustained contribution.
Judgment gives them that instant fix.
That instant fix of feeling superior and active, even while their hands remain clean of any real work.
And that lack of internal foundation leaves them intensely susceptible to agitation and manipulation.
They're emotionally fragile. They react instantly to triggers of pride or fear without any rational filtering. They're highly predictable because their behavior is governed by instinct and external emotion, not internal values. This makes them easy targets for collective emotional waves, turning them into instruments for others, rather than autonomous critical citizens.
The feeling traps them in an idealized, perfect vision of the nation, creating a dangerous detachment from reality.
The feeling demands purity, but the actual country is complex, flawed, messy, and struggling. Refusing to acknowledge this reality means they cannot truly love the actual nation. They only love the pristine, perfect version they want to see. They reject imperfection because it threatens their emotional safety and their heroic self-image.
And the ultimate self-sabotage is the loss of capacity for real contribution.
The intensity of the emotion convinces them they have already done enough. This conviction kills the essential motivation for self-education, self-development, or learning complex civics. They stop at the feeling because the false sense of accomplishment provided by the emotional high extinguishes the very necessary drive for necessary work.
This continuous reliance on illusion leads to internal instability and eventual emotional exhaustion.
Without the bedrock of real action, they are perpetually fragile, living in terror of their illusion being exposed. They cling harder and harder to the emotion to silence the painful question, what have you built? This reliance inevitably leads to emotional exhaustion, kid sick, and eventually total apathy or indifference though. That's the final quiet stage of living by feeling alone.
And finally, this paper fire habit, it erodes their capacity for true love in general.
It does. If you're only capable of easy love, based on immediate emotion, you lose the capacity for true love in all aspects of your life. True love demands endurance, facing imperfections in a partner, in a job, in your life, and persistent understanding. They lose the capacity to love the real nation and consequently the real people and the real life. They're left with a magnificent inflated ego built on sand.
So this analysis of the individual's internal crisis raises a really important structural question. How do we stand firm when the world itself is designed to prioritize and reward the paper fire? We can't simply blame the individual. We have to examine the social structure that reinforces this emotional shortcut.
That's right. Individuals don't just invent this illusion in a vacuum. Social structures, media, culture, education, political rhetoric, they actively shape our perception of what constitutes valuable commitment.
And these structures are incentivized to promote the paper fire because it's profitable and controllable.
Absolutely. Symbols are necessary for cohesion, but the danger becomes acute when symbols are stronger than substance, when form outweighs essence, and the easy emotion linked to the symbol drowns out the understanding of its true, quiet value. The modern information environment inherently favors what spreads easily, which is emotion, over what is hard to build, which is action.
So the system has a natural bias because it operates according to human nature. The easy wins over the hard. The loud overwhelms the quiet.
And a structural environment that constantly rewards performative emotional expression trains entire generations to be led by feeling. I mean, think of how quickly outrage can be monetized. This makes it incredibly difficult for the average person to discern true, quiet love from temporary, loud sensation. The system rewards the shouters over the builders.
And that feeling of responsibility is diluted long in a massive society. If everyone is patriotic, my contribution feels smaller.
That's the psychological dilution of responsibility. When an identity is shared by millions, each person feels their individual responsibility shrinks. So they choose the path of easy emotion because it allows them to feel they've contributed, even if their actual contribution is zero. It's an inexpensive way to satisfy the conscience without demanding personal effort.
And in the structural landscape, everyone is competing for moral appearance.
The feeling of patriotism becomes an easy cloak. Katama Radomak. It's immediately attractive, it's morally unchallengeable in public discourse, and it allows anyone to appear virtuous without having any internal content.
And when everyone wears this cloak, the essential question gets forgotten.
The question of how have I lived when no one was watching? What is my quiet truth? The competition for the image of virtue often kills the actual pursuit of virtue.
So the path of self-awareness means recognizing these factors without condemnation. It's about not letting the structure dictate our internal values.
Exactly. We have to recognize that the crisis is not the structure itself, but the gap between the structure's powerful emotional influence and the individual's lack of an independent internal foundation. An individual cannot instantly change media or society, but they have the power to choose not to be swept up by empty emotion. They can choose to operate based on true, quiet values rather than external manipulative stimuli. They can claim their freedom from the demands of the crowd.
We've analyzed the roots, the mechanisms, and the cost. So now for the crucial part, the actionable strategy. How do we choose the coal fire every single day? How do we build that enduring commitment in a world that's constantly demanding the paper fire?
This requires a strategy that's rooted in consistent, small, repeatable, and frankly unglamorous habits. We are aiming for an internal foundation that is completely independent of external applause.
So strategy 1, distinguishing emotion from responsibility.
When you feel that surge of pride or excitement or even righteous anger, you must immediately apply a filter. Ask yourself, does this emotion come with a commensurate difficult action plan?
And if the answer is no?
If the answer is no, you must log that feeling as a temporary phenomenon, a psychological event, not as moral proof of your worth. We have to adopt the mantra, emotion is the guest, responsibility is the host. You acknowledge the feeling, but you ensure responsibility maintains control of the house.
Strategy 2, practicing silent kindness.
True love for the nation starts small because the nation is its people. It begins with kindness and integrity towards those closest to you, your neighbors, colleagues, and family. Small acts of goodness, keeping commitments, respecting community property, choosing honesty when it's inconvenient. These are the foundational bricks of true love. Most people seek some grand external gesture. The source reminds us that the grandest structures are built from millions of tiny, quiet, repeated efforts.
And strategy 3, building personal discipline. Kailut Kanhun. This is the fuel for the coal fire.
A strong nation is a collective of self-disciplined individuals. Discipline is the antithesis of the paper fire. It is not glamorous. It's waking on time, fulfilling duties consistently, managing finances honestly, and maintaining commitment even when the enthusiasm is long gone.
These unseen, repetitive acts build the character that enables endurance.
Exactly. If you cannot manage your own small life with integrity, you cannot possibly contribute to the integrity of the whole nation in any sustained way.
Strategy 4. Learning for understanding, not for excitement.
True patriots must understand what they love. This means reading history, not just the heroic myths. It means accepting complexity, acknowledging flaws, and appreciating the long, difficult struggle, not just the simple, pretty stories.
Loving what you don't understand is loving an illusion.
Mature love accepts and transcends reality. If you seek knowledge for depth, not for emotional validation, you move beyond the paper fire's superficiality.
Strategy 5 addresses the social pressure, abstaining from judgment.
Do not judge others based on the volume of their emotional expression. True love is often quiet. Judgment is the ego's favorite distraction. It's a way to avoid looking at your own lack of contribution. By consciously stopping the habit of judging others' patriotism, you free up immense internal energy to focus on building real value instead of policing empty rhetoric.
Strategy 6, the strategic pause, the Kong Lung. This is so critical in our modern reactive age.
In an age of rapidly spreading emotion and instant outrage, the pause is freedom. It is the necessary space between a stimulus and your response. The pause allows for reason, for dignity, and for the ability to act based on sustained values, not external manipulative stimuli.
It prevents you from becoming a victim of a collective emotional wave.
The paper fire needs speed. The coal fire requires stillness.
Strategy 7, contributing through one's actual work.
This is so simple and so profound. Everyone must commit to doing their job well. Labor seriously. Respect your profession, create genuine value, avoid cheating, and do no harm. A society built on millions of such focused, disciplined actions, a carpenter measuring twice, a teacher preparing diligently, an accountant being honest, is infinitely stronger than any political slogan.
Doing the smallest job well is the greatest thing you can do for the national community.
It truly is.
And strategy 8 focuses on the internal structure. Cultivating integrity. Chintruk?
Integrity is the quiet consistency between what you say and what you do. It is unseen, but it is profoundly felt by all. It is the backbone of the coal fire commitment. Integrity is built not through short-term passion, but through consistent, unyielding action in small things. Integrity is the proof that your national commitment is real, not performative.
We must consciously accept the unglamorous nature of true love.
True love does not make you feel like a hero. It creates humility. It forces you to face your limits and to recognize that your small, well-done part in the large community is infinitely more valuable than any fleeting excitement. It's about consistent presence rather than noisy display. The search for heroism is what kills maturity.
And finally, strategy 10, daily self-inquiry, the continuous self-check.
We have to ask those uncomfortable, grounding, personal questions every single day. Have I lived decently today? Have I kept my word? Have I built anything durable? Do I love the real complex nation or just the beautiful image of myself reflected in its symbols?
These questions prevent the ego from relying on the easy emotional shortcut.
They keep us grounded in reality, which is the only sustainable place from which true love can be cultivated.
So we have analyzed the roots of the illusion, and we've established a path forward.
Yes, and the core directive is movement. A conscious, deliberate move from the paper fire of sensation and emotional validation to the coal fire of action, integrity, and long-term commitment. The source material suggests that the true promised land of commitment is not frantic energy or fanaticism, but deep calmness, samantan. The quiet realization that one has done their small part, lived without emotional illusion, and built something meaningful and durable.
The coal fire doesn't need applause. It is enduring and deeply present. It is the quiet confidence of a mature individual, a person who knows who they are, what they're building, and what they truly love. We have looked at the mechanisms and the strategies for choosing this harder, better path. Now, we leave you, the listener, with the ultimate existential question posed by the source material, one you must confront every single day in the quiet of your own life.
Are we truly loving the nation, or merely loving the feeling that we are good people